Let me start the discussion by asking David Gruen about the white paper. David, the white paper, unsurprisingly, is very optimistic about Asia's economic future, but it's also true that Asia faces a whole series of very complex challenges, from governance to climate change to demography to natural resources. So can you tell us what are the core couple of points which underpin your confidence about Asia's growth in the coming century?
Thanks, Paul. I guess let me start with the story of Asia's growth in after the Second World War. In the mid-50s, Japan's standard of living relative to the rich world was about 40% of the rich world's standard of living in the mid-50s. And from that point, Japan grew significantly faster than the rich world until the late 1980s. So we're talking about a period of, say, between 2 and 3 decades. And it did that with relatively market-friendly policies relatively market-friendly policies, including investment in human capital, high investment rates, relatively low inequality, a whole bunch of things that were conducive to good growth. Now, despite the fact that China has grown rapidly since Deng Xiaoping opened China up in the late 1970s, China's standard of living relative to the rich world is now 20% of the rich world's standard of living. So remember the numbers. In the mid-50s, Japan's standard of living was 40% of the rich world's standard of living at the time. China is currently 20% of the rich world's standard of living. What about India and Indonesia? They're about 10% of the rich world standard of living. These numbers are GDP per capita at PPP, which is the right way to think about it, at purchasing power parity. So, why do most people who look at this have a central forecast that says that China, India, Indonesia, and other Asian countries can grow rapidly, significantly faster than the rich world for the next 2 or 3 decades? The reason they have that confidence is because, not that confidence, that central forecast, I'll talk about risks in a minute. The reason they have that central forecast is because provided you have relatively market-friendly policies and you invest in human capital, you save a lot, you should expect to grow strongly while you are so far behind the technology frontier. And it takes a long time to one need not believe that China's standard of living will be the same as the US's in 30 years, but it's hard to imagine them not catching up a fair way from where they are now. So does that mean, if one believes that, does that mean that one thinks that it's a straight line from here to there? No. There will be business cycles in the growth of China and India and other countries. These countries will experience volatility, which is the nature of economic growth. So most of the people who believe in an optimistic future for Asia don't think that it's all sunshine from here for the next 30 years, but they do think that it's a strongly rising trend. So the next question is, are there things that could derail this story? And the answer to that is absolutely, absolutely. No one has a crystal ball, and all sorts of things could potentially go wrong, and we're all good at listing those things, but I'm happy to give you my list. Political things could go wrong, geostrategic things could go wrong, by which I mean the relationship between China and the US, South China Sea. Demography could go wrong for China. China is aging rapidly because of the one-child policy. There are environmental constraints, clean water, pollution, climate change. So there are all sorts of things that potentially could go wrong. But you could have said the same, the future is uncertain. That's not a new insight. Had you been sitting in 1955 in Japan, you would have been able to come up with a long list of things that could go wrong with Japan.
Now, David, I think if you can just hold your next thought, you can just hold your next thought, and we'll come back to it. But